Welcome to Echo Forge, dark fantasy and sci-fi stories from the edges of forgotten worlds. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next vision. Now, let's step through the gate.
The Dark of Space, Part 5. He leaned in closer, willing the cryptic shapes to align into coherence. It was the same damn entity, offering glimpses of answers the only way it knew how. Through confusion, through a persistent invasion of his senses. It was a dark mirror of what he already faced, its visual language haunting in its familiarity, its truth a nagging echo in his brain. He felt a sick fascination mingled with the terror it evoked, and he struggled to understand whether it warned or deceived. Root suggestions, he murmured, voice strained, as if naming the unnameable would bring it into submission. But the projections layered over each other in senseless complexity, each flicker of the display a further degradation of what he thought he knew. Fuel gauges ticked down faster than they should, life support systems threatened failure. The entity's presence was a disruption, yet it pulsed with intent, insistent that he heed its impossible counsel. He recalibrated with manic determination, addressing the ship as if it were a recalcitrant crew. Acknowledge alternate vectors, reroute. His voice cut through the stillness, meeting only the electronic sighs of overworked circuits. The projected paths shifted with each second in a disorienting play of color and form, relentless and alien. The explorer's mind reeled against the challenge, a battle between human reason and something far older, far stranger. He entered commands, an incantation against disaster, watching the entity's projections intersect with his own dwindling chances. They played their enigmatic game across the panels, shifting with predatory grace as if testing his mettle, his willingness to gamble on their truth. He took a deep breath, felt the pressure of time pushing against his ribs, and squared his shoulders. Run course adaptation, he said, a hoarse demand to his treacherous ship. Give me options. The star map lit up, a jagged mess of possibilities, and he squinted at it like a riddle. Somewhere in the madness lay his salvation, or his ruin. He let the seconds slip by, each a chisel stroke on the tombstone of his fate, and held firm to the one certainty that remained. He would solve this, or he would die trying. The display wavered, reality shifting beneath it, as he raced to understand what was clear only to the alien mind. He threw everything he had against the doubt and noise, working past the pain in his hands and the dizzying vertigo of choices without meaning. In the cramped control room, with the entity's presence crowding his every thought, he let the tension and determination build into a fever pitch, until it felt as if his entire world would burst from the strain. Squinting at the display, he caught a brief glimpse of something that made sense, a thread of clarity woven through the chaos. He reached for it, fighting through a final wave of resistance from the beleaguered systems and from the dark promise of the anomaly beyond. In the ship's bowels, metal groaned against its burden, but he ignored it. He focused on the impossible lines, the alien equations, until they bent to his will. Update now, he ordered, a whisper against the noise. And he waited, feeling time stretch into eternity as the lights sputtered one last mocking beat. Everything failed at once. The ship cried out like a wounded animal, alarms blaring in a panicked symphony, and the explorer fought through the surge of chaos with nothing but raw determination and two unsteady hands. He leapt between the failing consoles, the flicker of light strobing the rhythm of his growing desperation, and shouted commands to a void that offered no promises. It was as if the ship knew its own end and surrendered to it gladly, but the explorer refused to follow. Holographic images from the entity exploded across the control display, a torrent of meaning he couldn't afford to ignore, urging him to trust what he couldn't understand. His jaw set with furious resolve, he muttered, "I have to make this work," and dived headlong into the digital carnage, reaching for the fragments of hope that lay buried in the chaos. He lunged for the nearest panel, fingers stabbing at a frenzy of buttons, his breaths ragged and loud against the mechanical wailing. Systems were collapsing around him in a dissonant avalanche, each failure feeding into the next, each critical alert a hammer stroke to his resolve. "Override," he shouted, demanding cooperation from the defiant ship. His mind raced to outpace the clock, to bend time and odds to his will, but the hardware answered with stutters and sighs, its groans echoing the inevitability he fought to ignore. Somewhere in the madness, the lights faltered and surged, and he saw himself reflected for a moment in the smooth surfaces of the display, frantic, haggard, but unwilling to yield. "Backup diagnostics," he commanded, desperation thickening his voice, and watched the console flash with hollow promises of assistance before surrendering once more to chaos. There was an intimacy to the disaster, a sense that the ship was a living thing betraying him. Or perhaps it was simply obeying a force stronger than his will, an ancient draw toward destruction. He sprinted to the next station, heart pounding a reckless cadence, and tore through more calculations that refused to add up. Screens blinked their lethal rhythm, an electrical mutiny that threatened to overrun his sanity. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. The entity's presence surged again, more invasive than ever, a storm of holographic signals on the display. The explorer's head spun with the pressure of its insistence, and the thought it planted cut through him like a blade. Did he dare trust it? He hesitated, a heartbeat caught between logic and panic, then gritted his teeth against the flood of doubt. The only thing left was to choose, to make the gamble that would either save or doom him. "Root me," he demanded, taking the plunge. "Feed me viable options." His own voice startled him with its vehemence, a battle cry in a war fought with ones and zeros. The ship pitched under his feet, groaning as if to jettison its troubles and die peacefully, and he clutched at the nearest handhold to steady himself. The world shrank to a blur of red warnings and relentless imagery from the alien presence, each pulse more urgent, each projection more real. Logic fought with instinct, a battle that replayed 1,000 times per second as he tore between stations, implementing the entity's baffling suggestions as if the sheer act of will might force them into coherence. He was sweating, shaking, and for a terrifying moment he felt his grip on reality itself begin to slip. But he anchored himself with purpose, with a fierce drive to wring order from disorder, and kept going. A command module flared with improbable data, and he seized on it like a drowning man grasping a life ring. It had to mean something. It had to work. The lines between entity and machine blurred until he couldn't tell one from the other, but that didn't stop him. The anomaly's pull was palpable, a yawning darkness that clawed at his senses, yet he strained against it, a solitary force of human defiance. "Stay with me," he urged the unhearing vessel, wrenching sense from chaos with each urgent keystroke. He felt the raw edge of his own mortality, but he also felt a strange exhilaration, the gambler's thrill as he bet everything on the unknown. His vision was a dance of erratic lights and the pulse of the entity's messages, a tempest in the eye of which he stood alone. Reality narrowed to that frantic singularity, where life and death shared the same breath. With each stroke, each muttered command, the chaos swelled to meet him, then shifted just enough to keep hope alive. Systems flickered between life and death in rapid succession, a series of heartbeats in digital form, and he hammered at them with an urgency that knew no patience and no defeat. The holographic projections came faster, so vivid they threatened to eclipse his senses. The ship's alarms were a constant scream, the ultimate refrain of rebellion, yet he forced himself to stay steady, to stay focused. "Trust the input," he shouted, rallying against the odds. "Integrate." It was a desperate push to mold alien intention into something real, something tangible. In the staggering rush of it all, he felt himself pulled apart and sewn together, fragmented and complete, a wild symphony of madness and clarity. But he didn't stop. The indicators plunged, the ship's veins clogged with error, but he didn't stop. The edge of disaster was a thin line now, drawn closer with each choice, each input, and the explorer hung suspended there, uncertain and resolved. In the pulse of dying lights, with the hum of failing machinery filling his ears and the entity's presence more insistent than his own heartbeat, he made the final leap. System integration complete, he willed it, willed it, willed it, as if sheer insistence might overcome the impossible. And in the last electric beat before darkness took hold, he thought he heard the soft sigh of surrender from the ship, a whispered acknowledgement from the void. Then everything was chaos, and the line went taut and snapped. The explorer worked with silent desperation in the suffocating control bay, his shadow bending grotesquely beneath dim industrial lights. Gloved hands flew across the console as he fought to give life to a dying probe. From twitching displays and twitching cables, the echoes of clacks and beeps lingered, stitching themselves into the fabric of a warning beacon. The entity loomed unseen, manifesting in ghostly images and sudden surges of energy that threatened to tear him apart. Each spectral flash left the explorer clutching his mind, torn between fear and urgency as he coaxed the ship to his will. A muffled clatter reverberated through the metal-plated floor as the explorer yanked a bundle of cables free. He paused for a moment, surveying the cramped control bay, and wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead. "Initialize diagnostics," he muttered, as if trying to anchor himself in the sea of machines and shadows. The ship responded with a flicker of blue light from the holographic displays. He hunched over them, arms angled awkwardly, fingers moving with an engineer's determination and a condemned man's resolve. Outside, a black void peered in through a narrow viewport, the silent judge of his efforts. The explorer knew the urgency of his task, understood the fragility of the human worlds that lay in the path of something vast and unimaginable. The probe had been part of this ship since its beginning, now ancient, an artifact from the time of great ambition. His task was to fill its memory with the things he had seen, the entity's terrible presence, the spatial distortions it warned of, the things his mind could barely hold. With a rough breath, he turned back to the console. "Encode with priority." He snapped to the empty room, feeling the old ship groan around him as it bent reluctantly to his will. He rewired, reprogrammed, sent threads of code snaking into the dark heart of the probe. The very structure of the ship seemed to shudder as the entity drew nearer. The air crackled with static and his own dread. A ghostly whisper brushed his ear, an incoherent murmur that spoke of failures and endings. The entity was trying to help. He believed that, wanted to believe it, but the way it spoke was more than he could bear. Images flashed across his mind, more real than the metal and wires around him. A burning sky, stars that went out like snuffed candles, cities melting into shadows. He gripped the edge of the console until his fingers ached, waiting for the vision to release him. "Increase encoding frequency," he shouted when he could breathe again. He saw the faint scorch marks left behind on the panels, felt the strain on his mind and his dwindling sanity. The dim lights flickered, as if mocking his efforts, and he doubled down, letting the ship swallow him, letting his fear drive him forward. A resonance filled the bay, mechanical yet alive, a steady pulse that synced with the explorer's frantic heartbeats. He stripped the probe to its essential parts, ruthlessly discarding anything that couldn't serve his singular purpose. Like everything on this ship, the probe was failing. His own survival was an impossibility, but it was still a chance, a fragile thread that he could send into the dark in his stead. He reached deep into the coding layers, forcing it to accept things it wasn't built to understand. Around him, a symphony of beeps and clacks announced his progress. The probe began to respond, its memory swelling with warnings. He smiled a hollow smile, more of a grimace, as a piece snapped into place. The entity manifested again, an onslaught of sound and color and half-formed memories that made the real world tremble. The images tore at him, pushed him to the brink of what his mind could hold. He clenched his jaw against them, against the things they made him feel. More warnings, more threats. He had seen them all. The trick was to focus on the task at hand, to lose himself in it. His voice was a strained rasp as he murmured, "Run the diagnostic sequence now." The air shimmered around him, and the displays shifted through a spectrum of light and shadow, imprinting their agony onto the walls and the explorer himself. With relentless focus, he linked the probe's memory banks to the ship's central systems. He had to know that it was all there, that it could make them listen when he was no longer able to speak. There was a perverse satisfaction in seeing the memory capacity maxed out, the warnings too vast to fit comfortably into anything built by human hands. He collapsed against the console for a moment, drained, feeling the relentless pressure of the entity's presence. He could sense the cold detachment of space, the walls closing in on him. But he was almost there. The probe was nearly ready. It hung suspended in the center of the bay, a metal fetus that pulsed with stolen life. As the ghostly images flared again, his own memories came back to haunt him. A child's scream, a woman's face, and the helpless terror of being too late. He shouted against them, a wordless cry that mingled with the mechanical noise. Then he was back at the console, because that was all there was. His hands moved with purpose, even as his mind slipped into chaos. Encoding completed, he gasped, clutching at that small certainty. His fear and desperation mingled with a strange hope that the beacon could carry his warning. As the ship's lighting dimmed to its lowest point yet, the entity surged across his consciousness, leaving him shaken but still moving. Always moving. The explorer moved through the narrow passageway like a spectre, systems failing and flickering out behind him. Around him, the ship sighed its last mechanical breaths, its inner workings unraveling with ominous clanks and groans. Through a cold mist of his own breath, he pushed into the main deck and stared at the launch controls. This was it. He wiped a line of sweat from his brow, felt the dark void leering in through every crevice and corner. They had to know, a world had to know. He screamed the command with his hands and voice. "Launch this warning now," he shouted, the sound desperate and raw in the emptiness. His fingers flew over the console, activating systems, overriding failures. Every key he touched was an act of defiance, every switch an echo of his determination to be heard. The ship seemed to mock him with its groans, as if questioning his will to fight until the end. The entity surged through the ship, its presence as vast as space itself, leaving behind the psychic imprints of worlds dying. It filled the explorer's mind, its imagery both urgent and overwhelming, breaking into his thoughts with a force he could barely resist. He saw the nightmares of 100 planets, felt their destruction as though he were part of it. His knees buckled, but he clung to the console, forcing his own reality back into focus. He fumbled for breath, his voice a hoarse whisper in the growing chill. "Get it out there," he told himself, and the probe seemed to hum in answer, as if feeling the same urgency, the same final chance. He could see it now, suspended beyond the viewport, its dark silhouette sharp against the stars. There was still time. There had to be. Around him, ghostly wisps of vapor danced through the air, mingling with the cold and the visions that haunted him. The entity's warnings pulsed through the ship, merging with the shrieks and groans of systems giving way. The explorer felt the chill against his skin, a physical manifestation of the presence that permeated his very being. He reached for another set of controls, his fingers a blur, adjusting the beacon's trajectory. A memory, more vivid than life, exploded across his mind. A man with the same desperate eyes as his own, surrounded by crying children, too far away to save them. He closed his eyes, shut out the things that he couldn't let himself see, and worked the controls with renewed determination. The activated thrusters roared in response, and for a moment he believed he could hear the sounds of his own sanity crumbling beneath the weight of it all. He staggered back, panting, feeling his breath freeze on the air. "May this warn them all," he murmured, the words a prayer to the indifferent void. But he knew what it meant to send a message that might not be heard. He had tried so many times before. He knew what it meant to be too late. The thrusters roared to life, filling the ship with a deafening crescendo. Even through the layers of metal and desperation, he heard the unmistakable note of struggle in them. Like a dying animal trying to rise one last time. The probe was almost gone. He had done what he could. He only hoped it was enough. His eyes flicked to the viewport, catching a glimpse of blinding light as the beacon hurtled into the abyss. It was beautiful in its fury, a streak of impossible brightness against the empty black. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, then turned back to the console, driven by the fear that something, anything, might still go wrong. A shockwave of images slammed into him, the entity's final push. Cities consumed by flame, children weeping in darkened streets, a lone figure crying out against the end of everything. He was back at the controls, moving faster than he thought possible, a machine himself, a part of the ship that refused to die. Then silence. He slumped to the floor, back against the cold metal wall. Around him, the systems gave one last feeble gasp before blinking out forever. His breath was a fading rhythm, visible and ghostly in the chill air, each exhalation a memory, a hope, a warning that others might still hear.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.